Junella Hargrove buried her husband on a Tuesday, and by Friday she had learned that for 20 years he had kept another woman, another house, and another son 200 miles away in a town she had never heard of. She was 68 years old, and everything she thought she knew about her marriage came apart in the time it took to read a name off an envelope. Then, going through Thaddeus's papers for the funeral costs, she found a second will. Not the tidy one his lawyer had been reading to the family. An older one, written in his own hand, sealed and dated before any of the lying began, and what it said about the house in Tillicum Bay would leave the people lining up to take everything from her with nothing left to say. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The casseroles started arriving before Thaddeus was even in the ground, which was how things were done in Marrow Glen. Nella found herself with a refrigerator she could not close and a kitchen counter lined with foil-covered dishes from women she had known for 40 years, each one pressed on her with the same low voice and the same hand on her forearm. She thanked every one of them. She wrote the names down in a notebook so she would remember whose dish to return, because that was what you did, and doing what you did was the only thing holding the days in any kind of order. He had died the way he had lived, without much fuss. A heart that simply stopped one morning between the second cup of coffee and the drive to the lumberyard where he had worked the front counter 3 days a week since he retired from the route. 61 years she had been alive when she married him. 71 now. The arithmetic of it kept surprising her. 43 years of marriage felt like both an enormous weight and a thing that had passed in an afternoon. The service was at Bethel, where they had sat in the fourth pew from the back for most of their lives together. Their daughter, Gwendolyn, flew in from Denver with her 2 boys and stood beside Nella at the front, gripping her elbow through the whole thing as if Nella were the one who might fall. People said the things people say. He was a good man. He'd give you the shirt off his back. You never met a steadier fellow. Nella nodded and accepted it and believed it, because she had no reason yet not to. The trouble came in through the mail slot. 3 days after the funeral, with Gwendolyn gone back to Colorado and the house gone quiet in the particular way a house goes quiet when the person who filled it with small noises is no longer in it, Nella sat at the kitchen table with the stack of things that had to be dealt with. Bills, the cemetery invoice, a form from the pension office. She had handled the bookkeeping for the back half of their marriage, after Thaddeus's eyes got bad for close work, so the envelopes did not frighten her. She slit them open one at a time with the bone-handled letter opener that had been her mother's. Most of it was what she expected. One envelope was not. It had come from a bank she had never used, addressed to Thaddeus, and inside was a statement for an account she had never seen, with a balance on it that made her set down her coffee. The address for the account was not their address. It was a post office box in a town called Tillicum Bay. She read the town's name and felt nothing in particular because the name meant nothing to her. She turned the statement over. On the back, in the section where the bank prints the joint account holders, there were 2 names. Thaddeus Hargrove, and underneath it, Coraline Buckley. She sat with that for a long while. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking at nothing. A wiser woman, or maybe just a more frightened one, might have stopped there and put the statement in a drawer and gone on not knowing. Nella was not built that way. She had been the one who balanced the checkbook and called the insurance company and read the fine print on every contract Thaddeus ever signed because he could not be bothered, and she did now what she had always done. She pulled the rest of the mail apart, looking for the thread. It did not take long. Once she knew the name in the town, the pieces that had been sitting in plain sight for 2 decades arranged themselves with a speed that frightened her more than the not knowing had. The route. Thaddeus had driven a regional delivery route for the better part of 30 years, and the route had taken him away 2 and 3 nights a week, and she had never thought a thing of it, because a man with a route is gone. That is what the job is. After he retired, there had been the fishing trips. The visits to a cousin in the next county, whose name she could not now recall him ever explaining. The phone that rang and got carried out to the porch. The Saturdays. There had been a whole second arithmetic running alongside her own, and she had never once thought to check the figures. She found a shoebox of his on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, behind the extra blankets, The kind of place a man hides a thing when he half wants it found and half does not. Inside were photographs. A boy at 6 or 7 on a bicycle. The same boy older in a graduation gown. A woman with dark hair going gray, laughing at whoever held the camera, on a porch Nella had never stood on, in front of a house she had never seen. And at the bottom of the box, folded inside a yellowed church bulletin, a birth certificate. Merritt Buckley. Father, listed plainly in the county clerk's own typeface. Thaddeus Hargrove. The boy was 31 years old, which meant it had started when he was an infant, which meant it had started while Gwendolyn was still in high school, while Nella was packing 2 lunches every morning and thinking she knew the shape of her own life. She did not cry, not then. The crying came later and in strange places, in the cereal aisle, in the car. What she felt sitting on the edge of the bed with the shoebox in her lap was something colder and clearer, a sensation like a window being opened in a room she had thought was sealed. 43 years, and a good third of them had a false bottom. She put the box on the bed. She went down to the kitchen because she did not know what else to do with her hands, and she made tea she did not drink. Through the window over the sink, she could see Thaddeus's workbench in the garage, the pegboard with every tool hung in its painted outline, the order he kept everything in. He had been a careful man, careful with his tools, careful with his money, careful with his story. That carefulness was the thing that would not leave her alone. A careless man gets caught. A careless man leaves a trail by accident. Thaddeus had kept 2 lives clean of each other for 20 years, and a man who could do that did not leave a bank statement in the regular mail by mistake. Unless something had changed, unless he had stopped being careful at the end, or stopped wanting to be. She thought about that until the tea went cold. She was still thinking about it when she went back upstairs, not to sleep, but to go through the rest of the closet, because if there was one there might be another, and she had decided somewhere in the last hour that she was done being the only person in her own marriage who did not know what was in it. There was another box. What was it was not photographs. The second box was smaller and heavier, a metal cash box with a lid that had rusted at the hinge, and it was not hidden behind the blankets, but underneath them, flat against the shelf where the weight of the wool had pressed it out of sight for who knew how long. Nella carried it to the bed and worked the latch with her thumbnail. It gave with a small complaint. Inside were papers. Not the warm kind, the photographs and the church bulletin, but the cold kind, the kind she knew how to read. Deeds. A folder of receipts held with a binder clip. A property tax notice from a county she had to read twice before she placed it, the county that held Tillicum Bay. And underneath all of it, in a long envelope gone soft at the corners from handling, a document with a word she would come to know better than she wanted to. Will. She did not open that one yet. She was not ready, and she had learned a long time ago that there's a difference between wanting to know a thing and being able to carry it once you do. She set the envelope to the side and went through the rest first, the way she would walk the perimeter of a problem before stepping into the middle of it. The deed told most of the story without needing the will at all. A house and a half acre in Tillicum Bay, purchased 22 years ago, in Thaddeus's name alone. The receipts were for work done on it across 2 decades. A new roof, a well pump, a wheelchair ramp dated 4 years back, which sat in her chest like a swallowed stone, because a ramp meant somebody could not climb stairs anymore, and she did not know who, and she found she could not stop wondering. She had assumed, in the first hours, that this was a story about a man with 2 appetites and the money to feed both. The cash box complicated that. A man feeding an appetite does not keep tax notices in order or save the receipt for a well pump. This was a man tending something. The same care he gave the pegboard in the garage, the same care he had given their own house on Linden Street, he had given to a second place she had never seen, for a family she had never met. The betrayal was real, but it was not the careless, hungry kind she could have despised cleanly. It was something built and tended, and that was worse because it had cost him steady attention for 20 years, and she had never felt a single hour of that attention go missing. She sat back against the headboard. Outside, the light was changing toward evening, the long gold slant that came through the bedroom window in the late afternoon and fell across the foot of the bed, the same light that had fallen across 40 years of ordinary evenings. She had loved this room, She had loved this man in this room. Both of those things were still true, and now they had a weight on them they would carry from here on. She thought about Gwendolyn, 2,000 miles away, who had stood at the front of the church and called her father a good man with her whole chest. Gwendolyn had a brother she did not know about, 31 years old, in a graduation gown, in a photograph at the bottom of a shoebox. Nella did not know yet what she would tell her daughter, or when, or whether the telling would be a mercy or just a way of making the weight somebody else's. That was a decision for a day that was not this one. What she kept circling back to was the question of why she had found any of it. Thaddeus had been thorough. If he had wanted these boxes gone, he had had years of warning that his heart was not what it should be. The doctor had been telling him so since the first scare. A thorough man, given fair warning, burns the boxes. He does not leave a bank statement to come through the mail in the week after his funeral, addressed to a dead man, where his widow would be the one to open it. Either he had run out of time and meant to deal with it and didn't, or he had not wanted to deal with it, or he had wanted her to find it, and had arranged, in the careful way he arranged everything, for the finding to happen after he was past the reach of any question she could ask. She looked at the long, soft envelope she had set aside. 2 wills. That was the part she could not get past. 6 days ago, she had sat in a lawyer's office in Marrow Glen and listened to a man named Salcedo read out Thaddeus's last will and testament, a plain document leaving everything to her, signed and witnessed 3 years ago. She had signed her own copy. It was filed. It was done. This envelope was older. The date inked on the outside in Thaddeus's square hand was from 21 years back, the year after he bought the house in Tillicum Bay. A will he had written himself before the lawyer's tidy version and never destroyed. She picked it up. The paper was soft as cloth. She held it for a moment without opening it, and then she did. The handwriting was Thaddeus's, no question. She had read his grocery lists and his notes left on the kitchen counter for 40 years. The square capitals he used because he said his cursive looked like a fence in a windstorm. This was that hand, slower and more careful than a grocery list. The letters set down by a man who knew the words mattered and was taking his time getting them right. It was not long. Thaddeus had never used 2 words where one would carry the freight. But it was enough, and Nella read it 3 times sitting on the edge of the bed with the gold light going to gray around her. And each time through she understood a little more of what he had done and why the doing of it had been the kind of thing he could not say to her face. The will was dated 21 years back. In it, Thaddeus left the house and the half-acre in Tillicum Bay and a sum of money he had set aside in the account under both their names to Coraline Buckley for her care and the care of the boy, Merritt, for as long as either of them should need it. That was the first part, and it was the part she had expected, the part that confirmed what the deed and the receipts had already told her. A man providing for the second family he kept in the dark. It was the second part that stopped her. The house on Linden Street, he wrote, and everything in it, and the savings they had built across their marriage, and the lot his own father had left him out past the reservoir. All of that went to Nella, free and clear, with a line under it he had pressed hard enough to nearly tear the paper. Coraline and the boy were never to have any claim on it. He had written it twice, in 2 ways. The careful redundancy of a man who had read enough contracts at the lumberyard to know that a thing said once can be argued and a thing said twice cannot. Whatever happened to him, however it came out, the home she had made was hers and could not be touched. And then a paragraph that was not legal at all, that no lawyer would have let him keep in a will, the kind of thing a man writes when he is alone at a kitchen table 11 at night and the house is asleep around him. He wrote that he had done a thing he could not undo and would not insult her by trying to explain. He wrote that Coraline had been sick a long time, longer than Nella would guess, and that Merritt had been born needing more help than most and would need it all his life, and that once Thaddeus had started carrying them, he had not been able to figure out how to stop without letting them fall. He wrote that he had been a coward about telling her, and that the cowardice was the part he was most ashamed of, more than the rest of it. He wrote that he had built the will this way, so that when it all came apart, and he knew it would come apart, she would not lose her home on top of losing the truth. He wrote, at the bottom, in letters smaller than the rest, "I protected the wrong thing for too long. This is me trying to protect the right one too late." Nella set the will down on the quilt. For a long time, she did not move. The cold, clear feeling from the night before had come back, but it had something underneath it now, something she did not have a clean name for, a grief that was not only for him, but for the version of him she had buried on Tuesday, the simple good man in the fourth pew, who turned out to have been carrying a weight she had never once seen him set down. He had come to bed beside her every night he was home and slept, or seemed to, and all the while this had been folded up inside him like the paper folded up in the cash box. She got up. She went to the window. Thaddeus's workbench sat in the dark garage with a pegboard above it, every tool in its painted outline, and she understood now that the order out there had never been about the tools. It had been a man keeping one room of his life perfectly square, because the rest of it was crooked in a way he could not fix. She thought about being angry. She had every right to it, and the anger was there, real and available, and she knew she would spend time inside it in the weeks to come. But standing at the window that night, what she felt mostly was the strange weight of having been protected by a man, even in the act of his betraying her. He had lied to her for 20 years, and he had also, in the same 20 years, quietly built a wall around the one thing he knew she could not bear to lose. Both hands had been working the whole time. She had only ever seen the one. There was a phone number on the back of the will, written small. A Tillicum Bay exchange. Beside it, 2 words, she knows. Coraline knew Nella existed, knew her name, had known all along, the way the wife in the dark almost never does and the other woman almost always must. Nella stood with that a while. Then she wrote the number down on the pad by the bed, and underneath it she wrote, in her own hand, the only decision she had come to. I'm going to Tillicum Bay. Tillicum Bay was 4 hours northwest, the last of on a two-lane road that ran along the edge of a long gray inlet, and Nella drove it herself in the Buick because she did not want anyone in the car with her while she decided who she was going to be when she got there. Gwendolyn did not know yet. Nella had told her only that she had some of her father's business to settle out of town, which was true in the way that the smallest true thing can be, and her daughter had been too wrung out from the funeral to ask what business or where. She had the phone number in her purse and had not called it. She had thought about calling the whole drive and decided against it each time. A thing like this she wanted to do face-to-face or not at all, and she wanted to see the house before she saw the woman, because the house would tell her things the woman might try to soften. The town, when she came into it, was smaller than Marrow Glen and plainer, a working waterfront that had not been discovered by anyone with money, which surprised her. She had half built it up in her mind into something grand, some seaside place a man would keep a secret for, and instead it was boat trailers and a bait shop and a diner with a hand-lettered sign for crab cakes. Whatever Thaddeus had been doing here, it had not been living large. That settled something in her chest she had not known was unsettled. She found a street off the deed without much trouble. The house sat at the end of it, close to the water, a small place with gray shingles and white trim kept up better than its neighbors. The roof was newer than the rest. There was a wheelchair ramp running up to the front door at the gentle slope a careful man would build, switchbacked once so it would not be too steep, with a rail at the right height, and Nella stood at the bottom of the driveway looking at that ramp and understood that Thaddeus had built it with his own hands, the way he built everything, measuring twice and swearing once. She had been there perhaps 2 minutes when the front door opened. The woman who came out was the woman from the photographs, older now, dark hair gone fully silver, moving with the slow care of someone whose body had stopped cooperating some years back. She had a cane. She stopped on the porch at the top of the ramp and looked down the driveway at Nella. And she did not look surprised, and she did not look afraid. And after a moment she said, in a voice that carried clear across the still morning, "You'd be Junella." "I would," Nella said. "I wondered if you'd come." Coraline Buckley leaned on the cane. "He always said you would, if it ever came to it. Said you were the kind to walk straight at a thing." She tipped her head toward the door. "You may as well come in. I've been on my feet about as long as they'll have me this morning." Nella had driven 4 hours with a dozen versions of this conversation rehearsed, hot ones and cold ones, and not one of them had pictured being invited in for coffee by the woman her husband had kept. She stood at the bottom of the driveway a moment longer. Then she came up the walk, not the ramp, the regular steps to the side, and went in. The inside of the house was Thaddeus everywhere she looked, and that was the thing that nearly undid her. The shelves were his work, the same joints she had 100 of at home. A kitchen table he had clearly made, the legs turned the way he turned them. A window seat under the front window with a cushion worn at one end. She knew the hand that had built all of it the way she knew her own husband's voice. And seeing it here, in this house, given to these people, was a worse intimacy than the photographs had been. The bank account was money. This was ours. This was him, on his knees with a plane, in a house that was not theirs. Coraline lowered herself into a chair at the table and waved Nella toward the other one. "Merritt's at his program till 3, she said. "I expect you'll want to see him, or won't, and either way's all right, but I want to talk to you first without a minute. He doesn't take new things easy." "How long?" Nella said. It was not the whole question. It did not need to be. 31 years for Merritt. A couple before that for the rest. Coraline did not look away when she said it, which Nella gave her credit for. "I won't tell you I'm sorry the way you'd want me to be, because I'm not sorry I had my son, and Thaddeus was the only father that boy ever knew, and he was a good one to him. But I'm sorry for you. I was sorry for you the whole time. I told him 100 times you deserve the truth, and he couldn't get his mouth around it. That was his great failing. He could build anything in the world except a sentence that cost him something." Nella sat down across from her. The two of them looked at each other across a table Thaddeus had made. "I found a will," Nella said. "An old one. In his hand." Something moved across Coraline's face. "Then you know more than I do," she said quietly. "Tell me what he wrote." So Nella told her. She laid it out plainly across the table Thaddeus had built. The house and the half-acre left to Coraline and the boy, the money set aside, the line he had pressed hard enough to nearly tear the paper keeping Linden Street, and the savings clear and out of reach. She watched the other woman's face as she did it, and she saw no greed move there, only a kind of tiredness that went all the way down. "That sounds like him," Coraline said when Nella had finished. "Tie every knot twice." He was forever afraid of leaving a mess for somebody else to clean up. She turned the cane slowly in her hands. "I never asked him for the house. You should know that. I asked him for the truth year after year, and he kept giving me a roof instead, like the one could stand in for the other." She looked up. "It can't. I could have told him that for free." They sat a while, with the inlet light coming through the front window onto the worn cushion of the window seat. Nella found, to her own surprise, that she did not hate this woman. She had driven 4 hours fully prepared to, had wanted to, had thought the hating might be a clean thing she could hold on to. But the woman across the table had spent 30 years being lied to in her own way, kept in a house at the end of street, raising a son who needed more than most, while the man they had shared came and went on his route. They had been on opposite sides of the same locked door the whole time. That was not friendship, and it would never be. But it was not enemies, either. The trouble, when it came, did not come from Coraline. It came 2 days later, after Nella had gone back to the inn by the water rather than drive home, because she had met Merritt by then, a tall, soft-spoken man who lined the salt and pepper up just so and could tell you the tide table for the week from memory, and something about him had hooked into her and would not let her leave yet. It came in the form of a man named Osgood Price, who knocked on the door of Coraline's house on a Thursday morning while Nella happened to be sitting in the front room, and who did not take his hat off when he came in. Price was Coraline's late brother's son, her nephew, and he had the loud, easy manner of a man who has decided in advance that he is the smartest person in any room he enters. He had heard, he said, that Thaddeus had passed. He was awful sorry, and he understood there was some question now about the house, with the man gone, and he just wanted to make sure his aunt was protected, being, as she wasn't well, and the boy couldn't see to his own affairs. Nella sat quiet in the corner and watched him work. It did not take long to see the shape of it. Price had known about Thaddeus for years, had known the house was paid for and held in a dead man's name, and had come a moment the man was cold to position himself as the family protector, which in his mouth meant the family decision-maker, which meant the family signature on anything that needed signing. He talked about getting the property sorted out. He talked about how a place like this on the water was worth real money now to the right buyer, more than his aunt could know, and how it would be a shame for her to be taken advantage of by people who didn't have her interest to heart, And here he let his eyes drift to Nella for the first time, the strange older woman in the corner he had not been introduced to. "And who's this?" he said. "I'm the wife," Nella said. The room got very quiet. Coraline, in her chair, almost smiled. Price recovered fast. She had to give him that. He pivoted into something smoother, started talking about how this was clearly a complicated situation, and how complicated situations were exactly why a family needed someone level-headed to step in and handle the legal end before it all got tangled up in court. He had a man, he said, a man who handled estates. They could get the whole thing cleaned up quick, get the house sold, split it fair, before the lawyers ate the value of it alive. He named a number. It was the kind of number meant to make a sick woman and a confused son say yes before they understood what they were giving up, low enough to move fast and high enough to sound like a windfall to people who had never had one. Sell quick, take the cash, be grateful. Nella had spent 40 years reading the fine print on contracts her husband couldn't be bothered to read. She knew exactly what kind of man named that kind of number in that kind of voice. "There's a will," she said. Price looked at her like she was a fly he'd been waving off. "I'm sure there's all kinds of paper floating around," he said. "Paper's easy. Getting it through probate clean, that's what costs you. My man can." "There's a will," Nella said again, in the voice she used to use on the insurance company, "in his own hand that says exactly where this house goes and who can't touch it. And you, Mr. Price, are not in it anywhere I can find." Price's easy manner slipped, just for a second, and underneath it she saw the thing she had come to recognize. Not concern for his aunt. Calculation, doing sums, deciding whether she was a problem he could go around. She decided, watching him, that she was going to make sure he could not. Price left without the signatures he'd come for, but he left the way a man leaves who means to come back, with a card set on the table and a promise to be in touch about getting this handled, and the threat sitting plainly under the politeness. Nella picked the card up after the door closed and read the name of his estate man off the bottom and did not like the look of it. A man who comes to a sick woman's house already knowing who'll do the paperwork has planned further ahead than he wants you to see. "He'll go to the county," Coraline said from her chair. She sounded tired but not beaten. "He'll say I can't manage my own affairs, and the boy surely can't, and he'll try to get himself put in charge of the lot of us. He's floated it before. With Thaddeus gone, he thinks the door's open. Is there anyone here who'd speak for you?" Nella asked. "Anyone who knows you, knows the boy, knows you've run this house yourself for 30 years? Coraline thought about it. "There's Delia," she said. "Delia Ashworth. She ran the program Merritt's in before she retired, runs the board of it now. She's known him since he was 12. Knows me near as long." A pause. She never thought much of Thaddeus's arrangement, mind. "Told me to my face I was a fool to live on a man's promises and no papers. But she's straight as a plumb line, and the county listens to her." Nella called her that afternoon. Delia Ashworth turned out to be a brisk woman of about Nella's own age who said come by. She had the kettle on, and who listened to the whole of it across her own kitchen table without once interrupting, which Nella had come to value the way you value water. When Nella had finished, Delia sat back. "I'll tell you what's true," she said, "and you can do with it what you like. That house being in Thaddeus's name and no one else's was the thing I warned Coraline about for 20 years. It was the loose thread. A man dies, his estate's in question, and every price in the county comes out from under the porch." She tapped the table. "But you say there's a will, in his own hand," leaving it clear to Coraline and the boy. "I have it," Nella said. "Then the thread's not loose anymore. It's tied." Delia leaned in. "A holographic will, one a man writes out himself. It's good in this state if it's genuine and you can show the hand is his. You've got 40 years of his handwriting to prove that, I'd guess. Bills, letters, the like. Boxes of it. Then Osgood Price can stand in the county office and shout till he's hoarse. He's got no claim. He was counting on there being nothing but a dead man and a sick woman and a boy who can't sign. There's a fourth thing now." Delia looked at her steadily. "There's you, and a will, and a stack of proof. That changes the arithmetic on him entire." Nella drove back to the inn that night with the window down and the cold inlet air coming in, and she thought about arithmetic, which was a thing she understood better than most. Price had done his sums on the assumption that no one who knew the numbers would ever show up. He had not counted on the wife. The wife was supposed to be the one person in the whole story who would never come within 200 miles of Tillicum Bay, who would settle the tidy Marrow Glen will and never know the rest of it existed. She found a lawyer in the county seat the next morning, a careful young man named Ignatius Salcedo, no relation to the Marrow Glen Salcedo, which she took as a small Joe from a god she was not currently speaking to. She laid the will in front of him along with a folder of Thaddeus's handwriting she had gone home and gathered, the grocery lists and the notes off the counter, and 3 letters he'd written her early on, before any of it, when he was just a man courting a woman and meant every word. Salcedo read the will twice and compared the hands and asked her a careful question or two and then set it down with something close to relief in his face. "This is clean," he said, "cleaner than most." He wrote it like a man expecting it to be fought. He pulled a pad toward him. "Your nephew, or rather her nephew, has nothing. The property's directed. The handwriting's provable. If he files for guardianship over Mrs. Buckley, we can test it with the program director's testimony and 30 years of her running her own household. And we'll win, because it's true. The will moots the whole land grab." He looked up. "Frankly, Mrs. Hargrove, the strongest thing in this room is that you're standing in it. The wife defending the second family's claim. No court in the county's going to look at that and side with Osgood Price." Nella sat with that. She had come here to understand a thing, and somewhere in the 4 days she had crossed over into defending it. And she had not decided to, exactly. It had decided itself, the way the important things in her life always seemed to, while she was busy doing the next task in front of her. She thanked Salcedo and paid his retainer and walked out into the thin coastal sun. And she stood on the sidewalk a while because an idea had come to her on the drive over that she had not yet said out loud to anyone, and she was turning it now to see if it would hold weight. The idea was this. She did not want the house, and Coraline could not keep it alone, and Merritt would need a place and people around him for the rest of his life, which would run on long after his mother could see to him. The will had drawn a hard line between Linden Street and Tillicum Bay, 2 houses that were never to touch. Thaddeus had built that wall to protect her. But a wall keeps things out both ways, and Nella found she did not want, at 71, to spend whatever years she had left on the clean, dry side of a wall, alone in a house in Marrow Glen, returning casserole dishes. She had a daughter who did not know she had a brother. She had a brother of her own out west she barely called. She had spent 40 years tending a marriage that turned out to have had a whole second wing she was never shown, and the discovery had nearly broken her, and somewhere in the 4 days at Tillicum Bay, it had stopped being only a wound and started being questioned. The question was what she was going to do with the back half of a life that had just been handed to her in a different shape than she'd thought she was holding. She drove back to Coraline's the next morning and sat down at the table Thaddeus made and put it plainly, the way she put everything. She would not contest the will. The house and the money were Coraline's and Merritt's, exactly as Thaddeus had set it down, and she would help defend it against Price with everything she had, the handwriting, the lawyer, her own self standing up in the county office if it came to that. That was the first thing, and it was the thing that mattered most, and she wanted it said before anything else, so there could be no mistaking her for another version of Price, come to take instead of give. The second thing was harder to say. She wanted to be allowed in. Not to move in, not to take over, nothing that would frighten Merritt, who did not take new things easy. But she had no people to speak of, and this house had a man in it who was, whatever else was true, her husband's son and her daughter's half-brother, and she would like, if Coraline could stand it, to be a person who came around, who learned the tide table he carried in his head, who was on the list of people the county would see when they came asking who looked after this family, so that it was never again just a sick woman and a boy and a loose thread for the next Price to pull. Coraline was quiet a long time. Then she said, "He's lied to both of us for 30 years, and somehow in his dying he's gone and tangled us up together. That's a thing I never saw coming." She turned the cane in her hands. "I told him 100 times to tell you. I thought, when it came out, it'd be the end of everything for everybody. I never once pictured the wife sitting at my table offering to help me keep the house." She shook her head slowly. "All right, Junella, you come around. We'll see how Merritt takes you. He took to you better than most already, and that's not nothing. It went, after that, the way real things go, which is slowly and with setbacks. Price filed his guardianship petition 3 weeks later, and they answered it, Salcedo and Delia Ashworth and Nella, with a will and the handwriting and 30 years of testimony, and the county dismissed it so fast that Price did not bother to appeal. He drove past the house once afterward, slow, the way men do when they want you to know they're still around, and he did not stop, and he did not come back. The house was tied down. The thread was cut. Nella did not sell Linden Street. She kept it, and she went back and forth for hours each way, more than was sensible for a woman her age, and after a while she rented a small place near the water in Tillicum Bay for the stretches she stayed, because the back and forth wore on her, and because she found she slept better with the inlet outside the window than she did alone in the house where she'd learned the truth. She told Gwendolyn. That was the hardest day of the whole thing, harder than Price, harder than the first shoebox, because there is no good way to tell a grieving daughter that the father she eulogized had a second family and a son, and Nella did not try to make it pretty. She drove to Denver and set it across Gwendolyn's own kitchen table, plainly, and held her daughter while she cried, and did not defend Thaddeus, and did not condemn him either, because she had given up trying to settle which he had been. Both was the answer. He had been both, all along, with both hands working, and the only thing to do now was decide what she was going to do with the half of it that was hers to carry. Gwendolyn took longer than Nella did. Months. But she had 2 boys of her own, and somewhere in the second year she got curious about the uncle they had. And there came a day, the day Nella thought of afterward as the one that made all the 4-hour drives worth the gas, when Gwendolyn flew out and the 2 families sat in Coraline's front room together, awkward and careful, while Merritt recited the tide table for a week to a pair of boys who had never heard anything like it. The years did what years do, which is pass quicker than you expect, and change things while your back is turned. Coraline went downhill the way she had always said she would, slow and then less slow, and in the last stretch, it was Nella as often as not who drove the 4 hours to sit with her. 2 old women who had shared a husband neither of them would have chosen to share, keeping each other company at the end of a thing neither had asked for. Coraline died on a morning in early spring with the inlet flat and gray outside the window, and Nella was there, and she held the hand of the woman her husband had loved in secret for 20 years, and there was nothing strange about it anymore. They had worn the strangeness off years back. Merritt stayed in the house. That had been the whole point. In the end, the thing Thaddeus had built the wall to make possible, and the thing Nella had spent her 70s making certain of. The wall had given him the roof. Nella, with Delia Ashworth and the program and a careful arrangement Salcedo drew up, so that no one would ever again be able to come knocking with a number and a hat they wouldn't take off, had given him the rest, the people, the names on the county's list, the assurance that the loose thread was tied for good. He kept the salt and pepper lined up, just so. He kept the tide table in his head. He came to the door when Nella's Buick pulled in and said her name the same flat, pleased way every time, which she had come to wait for the way you wait for a thing you did not know you needed until you had it. She kept Linden Street to the end, though she spent less and less time there. It held 40 years. You do not throw away 40 years because a third of them had a false bottom. You carry the whole of it, the true parts and the lied-about parts together, because they happen to the same woman in the same life, and there is no sorting them into separate boxes no matter how a man might try. She thought about Thaddeus often, out on the small porch of the rented place near the water, in the evenings when the light went long and gold the way it had gone long and gold across the foot of their bed for 40 years. She had stopped trying to forgive him, having decided forgiveness was the wrong-shaped tool for the job. You forgive a man who wronged you and meant nothing else by it. Thaddeus had wronged her badly and, in the same motion, with the same careful hands, built a wall to keep her from losing the one thing he knew she could not bear to lose. There was no single feeling that fit a man like that. She had quit looking for one. She let him be both, the way he had been both the whole time, and she found that letting him be both was its own kind of peace, harder one than forgiveness, and steadier once you had it. The bank statement was what had started it. She thought about that, too. A careful man does not let a statement come through the regular mail by accident, addressed to himself, in the week his widow would be sorting the funeral bills. She had decided a long time ago now, what she believed about that, though she would never be able to prove it and had stopped wanting to. She believed he had left it where she would find it. She believed that at the very end, with his heart failing and the doctor's warnings finally landing, the man who could build anything except a sentence that cost him something had done the only confessing he was capable of. He had left a door unlocked and a light on and arranged. In the careful way he arranged everything, for the truth to reach her after he was past the reach of her asking why. It was a coward's confession, and it was a confession all the same. It was the most he had in him. She had decided to take it as what it was. A girl from a program came by the house in Tillicum Bay 3 afternoons a week now to sit with Merritt, a quiet, steady girl who had the patience for him, and on the afternoons Nella was there, the three of them would sit on the porch and watch the boats come in. Wendelin's boys called their uncle on his birthday, every year on their own now, without being told to, and that was a thing that had grown up out of nothing in the space of a few years, the way a garden grows up out of dirt if somebody tends it. She was tending it. That was what she had decided to do with the back half of a life that had been handed to her in a shape she did not expect. Not the clean, dry life on her own side of the wall that Thaddeus had built for her. The other one, the tangled one, the one with two families awkwardly braided into something that had no proper name and did not need one. On an evening in her 76th year, with Merritt beside her reciting the week's tides to a girl who had heard them 100 times and listened anyway, Nella sat on the porch and watched the last boat come up the inlet and felt the particular settled weight of a person who is exactly where she has decided to be. Not where she was put, where she chose, after everything, to stand. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.